Hello, I'm Mike Bithell, and I made, this game, Thomas Was Alone. Thank you for buying a copy. That's very kind of you, unless you've pirated it, in which case, please go and buy a copy. It's in sales quite regularly, hopefully. It's weird speaking to you from the past. So, this is Thomas. He was named originally by the community. The game's name, Thomas Was Alone, was arrived upon by a friend of mine who sarcastically suggested I should call the game Thomas Was Alone because that's emo, and emos would like it, and emos post links, which was sarcastic and lame in a weird way, but also actually weirdly right. We found that people were associating the red rectangle at the start of the game with the name Thomas, so giving the game that name immediately started a story going. And that happened in lots of ways throughout the game, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. So this is step one, side-to-side movement. If you're a platforming game fan, it should not present too much of a challenge to you. But here it's really just about easing the player into the way the world works. Seeing gravity for the first time, understanding how falling feels, and then actually kind of talking about that in the voiceover to kind of have a bit of fun with it. It's also introducing the idea of a narrated story, and it's introducing Thomas, so we hopefully kind of do quite a few things here at the same time. It also does the job of setting up Thomas as an inquisitive character. This is really important, and he becomes inquisitive, he becomes more and more interested by the world and tries to make assumptions about it, and that's kind of what his character's all about, at least at the start. Jumping had to be right. It's kind of the main way you interact in this game, obviously. I did a lot of research, I got kind of obsessive about it. I was still fiddling with the jump physics, I think, about 3 weeks before I launched the game. So it's something that just got fiddled with. It had to feel right. And yeah, there's one problem here, actually, and we'll talk about problems on this as well. I think the biggest issue here was that the speech is a bit misjudged. It takes a little bit long to get through, so most players when they play the game have already jumped and are at the exit by the time Danny suggests that they should jump. So I think that's an issue throughout a few of these first levels, so I think going back I would have done maybe a bit briefer here. This is a challenging jump, so this is a jump where the player can fail at it. So there's a gap, but the whole point of this level is to introduce the idea of jump distance and the fact that you can fall from a jump, but hopefully in kind of a safe environment. So here you can't die, you can't lose. All you're going to do is keep doing it until you succeed, and it's kind of a little bit easier than it looks as well. So hopefully, even if a player gets frustrated and just keeps clicking through it, they will actually eventually succeed. And the voiceover kind of calls attention to that in kind of a fun way as well, just to kind of reiterate that to the player. I played a lot of Uncharted before making this level, and it's kind of inspired by those kind of scripted moments in games. I didn't do as many in the game as I kind of expected to at the start. There's a few reasons for that, but I guess the main one was that once the players kind of, gets the mechanics in a good enough way, I didn't want to completely kind of overwhelm them with stuff that wasn't as interactive. But here it's cool because it sets up failure for the first time. it sets up what failure looks like, it sets up challenge, but it's not real. So you can't fail this map unless you run backwards. If you run forwards, the columns don't fall until you've actually left them, which hopefully kind of does the job of explaining that a little bit better. So this is a subtle one, but it's kind of important, and I know I'm talking a lot about game design introduction. This is by the way, this isn't like innovative in any way. This is Mario. This is every game you ever played. But I think it's kind of interesting to go through the steps. So here, this is a very specific skill. This is jumping up onto steps, but pressing jump and then moving once you've pressed jump. So here, if you just hold down, the direction key and then jump, you're actually going to hit the bottom of a staircase. What you need to do is jump and then in midair move across. And this is just a really subtle, simple level that kind of introduces that as a concept to the player. They don't actually have to do it that much in the main game, but it's useful to just kind of make sure that that's something I know the player can do at this early stage. So here is we're extrapolating on precision. It's essentially, we've done it in the previous level, we've made you do it. And here we're kind of queuing up a few of those. So if you fail at one, you can actually force yourself to go back a couple of steps in the progress. This is kind of the first time we're challenging the player, which is important, but it's important as well that it's not overwhelming. It's still very early days. I haven't yet shown you the kind of the differentiating mechanic of Thomas. So it's again just kind of bringing players up to speed with stuff and starting to show them how a game would work in this space. I didn't add respawning to the game until about a month before release. It's a classic example of something that every playtest I ever did. So basically, if you died in the game previous to a month before it came out, you were basically reset the level. So it didn't matter how much progress you'd made, you'd reset the level to the very start of the level, all your characters back where they started. Which means that you could, if you died late on in a level, lose about 5 minutes of gameplay. This was not good. And the playtesters told me at length in capital letters that it wasn't good in emails. But what I tried to do, what I realised was it was very hard to do, but I worked out about a month before release how to do it, and went back and added all these respawner points. And I'm so glad I did. If I hadn't done that, I think the game would have got very, 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 very tedious instead of its current level of kind of reasonable tediousness. It's also the reason why I think the game, sometimes people feel the game might be a little bit too easy, because I built the levels with that kind of failure in mind. So as you go through most of the levels in Thomas, they actually get easier as they go on, because I didn't want players to get frustrated. So I think that might be something I should make sure that I have the respawning system planned more than a month before release next time. Lighting. It's a weird one, the lighting. I didn't have lighting at one stage, there wasn't light. Then there was sounding a bit biblical. But as it went on, I kind of added that in. Initially I was doing them by hand for every level, and basically this procedural system kind of came out of laziness. I didn't want to do that anymore. And weirdly, as a side effect of that, it was cool, and the shadows moved and could be kind of related to placement of objects, placement of characters, and it was good. It's actually faked, because the game was made in free Unity. I didn't have any shadows within the game kind of proper, so what I did was they're kind of stretched rectangles. So I place a corner of the rectangle at each corner which the shadow is projecting from, and then kind of stretch them off into the distance. Any coder listening to this just lost all respect for me, because that's the most wasteful way you could possibly do this. But it kind of worked, and we just went with it. And it's one of the things that people seem to like. So yeah, fortunately it's rectangles, so I can be wasteful. Okay, so this is the moving platform corridor. This was an attempt to bring in something that's going to become very important in a very short amount of time, the moving platforms. It's really hard to introduce moving platforms because moving platforms move, and that makes them challenging and makes them a kind of complex interaction. So what the corridor here allows me to do is introduce you to the idea that sometimes the ground moves, but in a way that doesn't actually kind of impact you too much, and won't cause you, hopefully, to get too stressed out. People seem to like it. It's kind of a bouncy castle level. People tend to have fun as they move through it, which is quite cool. And yeah, it looks interesting, and hopefully it just kind of introduces the concept. This is the most important level in the game. This is the point where I basically get to the point. And arguably I should have done it a little bit sooner. However, this is where it is, and that's fine. So this is the point where the player has to learn how to switch characters, which is kind of the basis of the entire thing, is this switching between the characters. This is also actually one of the first levels. This is almost identical to the version that was in the original Flash game. You have two characters, both on the wrong side with their alternating targets. It's hopefully a space that makes a lot of sense. Kind of logically you can understand what's going on with it. There's no lighting that's complex in it. It's quite flat. It's intentionally, hopefully, everything about this level is designed to get out of your way so you can learn essentially, a few things. One, how to switch characters, obviously. Two, how to, the targets. The targets are specific to the character. And three, the difference in abilities, so you should work out that Chris needs help. If I can get those 3 lessons to you, and if you've completed the level, then you've learned all those lessons, the rest of the game becomes much, much more achievable. This was a weird little accident, this level, actually. There's, on Thomas on the right there, as you move up, you're moving through trigger boxes. If you don't make games, trigger boxes are basically spaces you jump into or move into, and they cause something in the game to happen. So as you move up as Thomas, you're hitting these trigger boxes which cause the walls to come in. But as a really weird coincidence, I got one of the timings wrong, so that as you moved up, there's a certain point where it looks like you can jump somewhere, you jump to it, and the wall flies out and hits you in the face. It's kind of a funny moment. And I did it, and I thought it was funny, and it felt kind of organic. And I took it to, when I started showing the game to people, it happened to everyone. It's a weird thing that it seems to catch everyone out. Even though there's nothing forcing you into it, 90% of the time people get hit in the face. And most of the time they laugh. So I left it in, and I'm really happy with it, actually. It's one of those nice little coincidences that worked out really well. Steps. Everyone loved the steps. They didn't, actually, and it's probably my biggest design regret in the game is steps. Basically are kind of obstacles that you have to jump over by kind of piling up a few characters in order to get through. That's fine. The problem with steps is that you have to do that repeatedly, that you have to essentially solve the same puzzle over and over again in a sequence, and there's just 2 or 3 too many times I do that in the whole game, and it's frustrating to players. It sucks. I went through and I removed quite a few of them, so if you're annoyed, you would have been more annoyed if I'd left it how it was. So yeah, it's a shame. I think there's some which are more acceptable than others, but yeah, if that's the worst bit of design in the game, I'm pretty happy though. So yeah, lesson learned. This level's a great example of how useful playtesting is. This map was always very similar to this, but there was one major kind of design difference, was that the stepping stones at the bottom of the screen had a wall, had no wall below them, so they were floating over water, which meant that you could fail about 8 or 9 times here, causing you to get very frustrated and angry. And it wasn't a soft fail where your character fell through and you got back up and carried on. It was a cruel, harsh fail that reset the level. And my playtesters hated it. So this is a great example of the kind of thing that to me was invisible, because I understood how the characters moved and I was making them and playing them all the time. To me, it was a really easy sequence of stepping stones that you can get through first time every time. But once I put it in front of playtesters, I got emails from people saying it was taking them like 45 minutes to get through this level because of that problem. So just sticking a wall underneath, I kept the water because it looked nice, but the sticking a wall underneath really kind of helped and just smoothed people through. People are still working out the game at this stage, and I don't want to kick them too much in the face. I've already hit them in the face with a wall. Danny really, I should have mentioned Danny a little bit sooner. He just does so much. It's a long story that I've told lots of places, but basically I wrote the story for him. I was trying to find a voice that would suit the game, and I was a big fan of his writing and his kind of audiobooks and radio stuff and all the things he does. And I wrote the part kind of with his voice in mind. And then I tried to find people who could do it, and no one could do it. And then I got drunk and emailed him, and he said yes, which was a bit of a shock. So I'm really chuffed. He did an awesome job. He's been really cool with the game. He's talked about it. He's been lovely, and he's just a really nice chap. He's also really fast. I'm recording this after recording some other stuff with Danny, and he's amazingly quick at what he does. I'm doing a much worse job, and the people in the booth are getting bored, I imagine, at this point. John's my favourite character. Well, I'm going to say that a few times because I've got quite a few favourite characters, but John I really in particular like. He's insecure in a weird way. I'm not entirely sure why he is, but he is. And that leads him to kind of be dishonest and narcissistic, which I think a large number of creative people will associate with. I know I do. And he's so he's a really interesting character. I like the way he grows. I like that his journey as he goes on, and I like the way that his power of kind of basically being the highest jumper is usurped later on by Sarah, and what that does to his view on his situation. So he's a very cool character. This is another level actually from the original Flash game, which obviously I tweaked and kind of brought across. I really liked the idea of confined spaces as applied to this game, because with large spaces, having multiple characters with different abilities kind of hopefully feels kind of empowering, feels like you can do anything and get anywhere. Putting them into a confined space kind of becomes an interesting kind of jumble. They get in each other's way, they trip over each other. There's a nice little bit of narration here that kind of highlights that stuff, but it was just something really cool to play with. The other thing is, and I do this all over the place in this game, is I really love adding a character who has a specific ability and then not letting you use it for a little while. But specifically because I just think it builds anticipation. John can jump really high. You've seen that, and to then put him in a space where you can't play with that button is just kind of hopefully kind of intriguing and frustrating, and you want to pull through, and you're kind of with John in this level. John is angered by his situation, he just wants to be free. So hopefully kind of the player aligns at that point with John. This level exists solely to allow the player to feel their way into John. This is a chance for you to basically make him jump properly for the first time, and hopefully because of the constraints in the last level, that feels awesome. And I actually use the word awesome in the narration just to push you in case that's not how you're feeling. You should, it's a very good game. And then so you've now got access to this awesome jump, and you can do what you feel. I think this is the this is getting very self-deprecating, but I think this is the weakest level in the game. I came very, very close to cutting it. This is where the staircase repetition kind of becomes, well, boring. I did do a lot. I shifted things around, kind of varied the step sizes and gaps, and to add variety. But it's a lot better than it was. But it was not. It's the one that when I'm watching Let's Plays, and I'll talk a bit more about Let's Plays in a bit. But the way it's kind of the one that I fast forward through on the Let's Plays because I find it very, very slow. I don't know. That might just be over familiarity, but I don't like this level. Have fun with it though, and I'll see you on the next one. This is the last. This is actually the last level of the demo. So it's kind of important for that reason. But the kind of the big design lesson here, and you'll notice I guess like the lessons are slowing down at this point. But the big lesson here is that there's a temporary portal success. So previously all the portals have sat on a static ground. So you queue someone up, you queue someone up, you queue someone up. With this one, you have to finish this level by having Thomas falling through that portal. And it's hopefully it's kind of safe. If you miss your timing or you get him through early, you can always catch back up with yourself. So it doesn't punish you if you don't get it immediately. but it's something I really wanted to do later on, and there's quite a few places where I play with this idea. So yeah, it's that basically. It's a way of introducing that, and hopefully kind of hints at the possibilities if you're playing the demo of kind of where the game can continue on from there. Is all about the setup. To buy the fact that she actually thinks that swimming is a superpower, you kind of have to set her up before that as feeling weak. And Claire's not weak. She's not a weak character. She's not rubbish at jumping either. That's something she says. She's on a par with a lot of the other characters. But that insecurity hopefully kind of warms you to her, and you're with her at the point where she realises she has that superpower. You feel excited because you want a nice thing to happen to that character who you kind of had a, not pity, but kind of a sensitivity towards. What's really interesting with Claire is in a lot of the reviews and the kind of the chatter about the game that happens online, people say that Claire is fat and that she's insecure about being fat. Which is really odd, because I never thought of Claire as fat. She's big because she has to carry characters later. That's the kind of a design concern. And at no point does the script mention her weight or even that she has a physical insecurity. And that's kind of weird and odd, but it's also absolutely awesome, because if players are kind of coming to the game and placing these meanings on it without kind of me telling them, that's cool. It's really interesting. Whenever fan art's done, she's the big boned character, which is fascinating, and I like that players have kind of built their own little story on top of her. So exactly the same way as with John, I kind of really enjoyed the idea of introducing a swimming character and then having a level that you couldn't swim in. So there's that, and just me being cheeky again, basically. But the big lesson here is the idea of getting Claire to carry another character. So there's one point right at the start of the level you have to get John to carry Claire. You have to. There's no way of completing the level without doing it, which was cool, and kind of introduces that idea of carrying someone along. And then you've got an optional, you can do it over the stepping stones straight after, with Claire underneath and John on top. Surprisingly, a lot of players don't do that. I don't know if they don't see it, or they kind of, it just doesn't, they don't make that leap yet. But hopefully that idea's been implanted, because that's very useful later on. And I said it was useful later on. It's useful immediately after, which is this level, which is the payoff where you carry characters back and forth. I also really like the whole the fox chicken grain logic puzzle, and it's kind of Thomas's little nod to that. It's just something that people hopefully kind of will work out and kind of start to see what Claire can do and start planning out with that ability in mind in later puzzles. This is probably the most showy level. This is epic. This is the one that always goes in the trailer. I stole Rain from the method for doing Rain from Quick Fingers, who's an awesome Unity dude who I'm now fortunate enough to work with. And it's cool. It's a big epic moment. This is much like those falling platforms earlier on. This is kind of one of those big semi-scripted sequences, because the pace is defined by the water, so therefore I know that if a player is surviving, they are playing through at a certain speed. And it's cool. It also builds on the idea of carrying from earlier, but this time under pressure, so you have to move quicker and you haven't got time to think. And if you try and get Thomas off of Claire, you're going to run into problems very quickly. So there's that as well. So it's hopefully kind of a nice way of solidifying all the learning the player's done about Claire up to this point. Steps. I'm so sorry. On the upside, two things. One, I changed the shape of the steps, which I feel kind of massively improves them. And 2, I then sarcastically make a joke about steps in the script. So you can laugh with me at my lack of design ideas up to this point. This is one of my favourite levels. What's nice about this level is it breaks the thinking and learning you've done up to this point. So up to this point, I've been teaching you that Claire is for carrying other characters. If I'd not done that, this level would be a lot easier. It's because you've been told to carry characters for every level up to this point, your automatic reaction to a body of water is to jump Claire in and pile up all your characters, and that's not the solution. I love the fact that this puzzle kind of only exists in the head of the player. And it's great watching, Let's Plays and when I was doing playtesting and taking it to events and stuff, that you actually see people performing the action you've taught them to do of getting the characters on top of Claire, and then realising that's not the solution, that the solution is much simpler than they think. And there's only a few places in the game I managed to pull that off, but I'm really, really happy with this one. Music. David came in, he came in pretty early. Basically, the original Flash game had no music, and one of the biggest criticisms was that there was no music. There were no sound effects either. So I had to get someone, and I kind of fortunately found David through a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. And he did a cool little demo, which is now actually over the end credits, and he was awesome. I got him in. He wrote this amazing piece of music for each kind of chapter of the game. Basically, the way we worked is I would send him kind of the emotional script for the game of how the character's feeling, what's the setup here, and he'd work from that and kind of build a piece of music. About halfway through development, I made his life a lot harder because I decided I wanted a randomized procedural system, so you'll never hear the game too obviously loop. They're basically little sequences of music that kind of get piled up in interesting ways. And he was really good. He was really good with that. He split up what he'd already made and made it work, and then every track from that point on used that system really, really well. So he was really adaptive, and he's awesome. And he's like 14. Well, he's not 14, but he's very young, and it frustrates me how talented he is. I had a really good time working with him. So thank you, David. So this is an attempt to do a puzzle with kind of multiple solutions. This again was one of the very early levels I made. It was more of a kind of a test level originally, just to kind of check that all the characters were interacting correctly and the platforms were working the way I wanted them to. And it's cool because everyone has a different way of doing it. There's lots of ways of optimally doing it, but then there's lots of ways of also doing it in kind of cool show-off ways, which is nice. It's a good chance actually to talk about the backgrounds. So the backgrounds I was going to do kind of, much like the shadows, I was kind of going to do specific bespoke level backgrounds, and it was working all right. They didn't look great, mainly because I just wasn't spending enough time on them. This is a 100-level game, and it just wasn't working. So in the end, I did kind of a procedural system. So they're freeze-framed particle effects. So basically, I draw them all off from a batch of images, place them at different parallax depths, and just go with it. So hopefully that kind of gives everything a nice texture, and I think it brings all the levels together, and it means that every time you play a level it looks a bit different, which is fun. this is where I introduced spikes. I needed a hazard. Well, I needed two things. I needed a hazard that Claire couldn't get past, so not water, basically, something that she could get hurt by. And I also needed a hazard I could put on ceilings. I did actually try, because it's all in a virtual world. I was like, oh well, it's fine. I'll have upside down water, and it looked rubbish, as I'm sure you'd expect. So the spikes got added. I introduced them specifically just with Claire, just so you can, as a player, learn that Claire is actually going to be damaged by them, and it kind of just changes the relationship a little bit between Claire and the environment, and hopefully in a safe way. This level's pretty straightforward. I've got two versions of the commentary for this level. The first version is that, from a narrative perspective, I needed to establish that there was an intelligence to the system you're in, that there were negative forces, and I needed to disrupt the flow of play in order to make you aware that that was there. So a glitch kind of made a lot of sense, and it's kind of something the Matrix does deja vu quite a bit to kind of show you that something's been changed, and that was cool. The other version, and the more honest version, was that I had a very near deadline in order to take the game to a festival, and I had to have another level. I don't know why I'd set myself an actual kind of level count. No one was judging me or questioning me. 29 levels would have been just as good as 30 levels, but I did, and this was a nice way of reusing that map. Once I'd made it, I kind of assumed I'd always remove it, but once I'd made it, I actually thought it was quite cool, and there's a few little tweaks. So the moving platform moves a little bit faster, and obviously Thomas is there. So I kind of liked actually reusing the same space with different characters as kind of a way of twisting a puzzle. I didn't want to do it too many times in the game, because I figured, people would just feel I was being a bit cheeky and not making enough content. But it was a nice thing to just do once and to just see how that mixed things up. It's only as we record these that I'm realizing quite how much I played the new character, but you can't use them properly yet card. I do it all over the place. So in this moment, this is obviously Laura is introduced and deliberately separated out from Chris. It's nice because it lets us kind of learn who Laura is before we start interacting with her, and kind of it gives some context to what the interaction that she has with the characters later. So that's hopefully quite fun. I do this far too much, and I need to not do this in future projects. Not as much. Pixel clouds were something I worked on early on. It was one of those weird ones where I had the idea for it kind of art-wise before I actually kind of worked out how to use them in the game itself. So I thought it would be cool to have these big swirling kind of pixel shapes, and they look cool, and I made them, and then I kind of had to work out where they were useful. And actually this was the point where I developed the game in semi-chronological order, so I just kind of had the issue where I wanted to convey that the world was kind of turning on the characters a little bit. And it made sense to use the pixel clouds as an enemy to kind of show that the world was negatively kind of fighting back against their progress a little bit. And here it's a build-up. So the whole purpose of these levels is to kind of just slowly introduce the pixel cloud, kind of make the player more and more aware that they're a threat, and their relationship changes. So right now they're just watching. They're just there every now and again. They're glimpses, and they become more important as the game goes on. Okay, so this level is, again, it was a kind of a test level that I made that kind of later became something that was actually really useful and interesting in the game. The point of this level really is just to get you used to the idea that Laura changes people's jump heights. That's basically it. It's done earlier in the portal placement. You hopefully kind of half got it, but I just don't want to assume that you did. So here you have to actually kind of work out that bouncing actually kind of helps you progress. it's nice. It kind of gets you to learn it. It's safe. There's no threats. And yeah, it's cool. I liked it. I thought it was nice. I also didn't realise actually at the point where I was making this level that Laura and Chris were a perfect match, and I kind of played with that a bit more as it went on. I struggled to work out different puzzles involving Laura, because basically she makes things jump higher. That's a limited kind of scope, and one of the very kind of the cool ideas I had, I think, with Laura was specifically to keep her separate from the play space, so she couldn't interact directly with characters, but to have enough of her kind of poke out of a wall or be available to the other players that they could interact and get a benefit from her. And it allowed me to do things like this level where you have kind of an indirect relationship spatially with between the two characters, and I really like it actually. I think it's kind of interesting. I'd have liked to have done a few more of these. So this is the first time that a cloud has actually appeared in the play space. It's impossible for you to actually interact with them because it flies away so quickly. But it's that kind of encroachment. It should hopefully feel that they're slowly but surely building up their interest, and kind of like a wild animal, kind of building up their tolerance of the characters, and they're getting closer and closer and encroaching more and more on the game space. So hopefully that's kind of building up a little bit. I want the tension to build up. I want the presence of those clouds to be more and more known as the game goes on, and obviously we're starting to hit a point where the characters are starting to talk about that threat, and that's coming to the fore a little bit. Chris and Laura falling in love was not actually part of the original, the structure I laid out online. I actually put up the entire kind of narrative arc of the game online like a year ago, and I wasn't planning on putting those two together in a relationship. But as I worked on both their arcs and worked out kind of the journeys they were both going on, it became more and more clear that the relationship was kind of a perfect way of illustrating both characters' growth. So Chris is realizing that other people aren't necessarily the worst thing in the world, so the idea of him forming a real relationship with someone is good for him for that purpose, to kind of show that. And with Laura, she's just learning to trust others, which again is something that hopefully a relationship kind of symbolizes for her. So that was it was kind of a late choice, but I think it kind of just gives both those characters a little bit more and lets the player see what's changing with them, which is cool. So this is one of the very first levels I made. Actually, this was something. It was experiential. This is something I've realised that a lot of the levels in Thomas, they weren't designed around a puzzle. They were designed around an activity that I thought would be quite fun to do. So here, for example, this is about kind of getting a sequence of bounces working and how that feels to the player, and having those little constraints on what you can do. It feels fun bouncing up, just managing to hit each of those buttons. The height of the ceiling is kind of hopefully perfectly judged so that it just feels nice, and it's cool. And I never really thought of it from a story perspective, but I thought the design was cool. What's really, really cool is as I start to watch more and more Let's Plays, and I watch every Let's Play. If you put a Let's Play of the game up, I've watched it at some point, much to the annoyance of my girlfriend. And one thing that's happened in a few Let's Plays is people see a story in this moment. They see, because Chris is separated out and John and Laura are hanging out, they see that as a moment where Chris is jealous, which is really interesting, because it's, again, not something I'd thought of, much like the Claire obesity issue. That sounds like a great movie. That could be a good thriller, the Claire obesity issue. I like that. Sorry, I'm going off topic. So it's nice that people kind of saw a relationship forming, and they saw a meaning to the layout of the geometry in this level, which is cool, and kind of I think it means people were actually getting into the characters, which is really cool, really nice. So a lot like some of the other levels earlier on, this is a point where hopefully the player can kind of work out their own solutions to puzzles. They've got kind of an environment that goes through a loop, and they can kind of work out the way they want to approach it, and there's lots of different ways of doing it. The other big thing that's introduced here, I think, is the dotted lines. I think this is the first time you've seen them. The dotted lines were a problem that didn't really come up until this level, which was the idea of objects moving through barriers to the player. It's something that I hadn't really considered, and I'd not done earlier, and I didn't like the idea of them just moving through each other, because, I mean, that would work, but technically, but it wouldn't look right. It would look odd that a wall went into another wall. So I wanted something that kind of made a bit more logical sense. Dotted line feels almost like I guess it's weird. It makes more sense. It feels like a barrier, which is logical for the player, but it looks permeable. It looks like another thing could go through it quite nicely. So I'm really happy with that solution. It kind of didn't break the minimalism. It kind of felt logical. And yeah, I use them quite a bit throughout the game as the game goes on. It's a nice way of allowing me to move things in a way that doesn't necessarily feel logically real world-y. is another revisit of an earlier level. So this is the idea of water rising. The difference here is there's way more characters, and you get to choose the tempo. And I like that. It feels like you're in more control, but also what it really does is it mixes up that tempo. So there are these slow moments where you're planning out how to hit the button, and then these kind of panicked moments where you've got to get the character back, otherwise they're going to drown. And I like that. This level of all the levels, this is the one where there's a nice kind of variation in the way the player plays and the way they emotionally react to it. So yeah, I like this level. It's cool. This is the Panic Room, is what I think the file's called. It's not got a name in the game. And the idea is that there's kind of these moving parts, and it seems much more scary than it is probably, and it's confined and small and just a single screen. And it just feels like a really nice shift from the other levels. It feels dangerous, and hopefully the player then kind of realizes that they can get through it, and they feel ownership of the level, which is the intention here. It's hopefully empowering. As the fifth chapter of the game focuses on the characters kind of being removed one by one, the important thing here was to make sure the game stayed fun and didn't feel like a stretch. We weren't adding any more characters, for example. So this is where I kind of start to play a bit more with the environmental stuff, and I start to try and think about some different combinations of the characters and situations to put them in. The coloured switches, this is the first time they're in the game, I believe. They are there, well, they're there for a lot of reasons. To be honest, they're partly there just for me to cover myself. They allow me to lock off areas and make it so that one character can get somewhere but a second character can't. It's cool from that respect, because it makes puzzle design a little bit easier. And then there's hopefully a few places where that actually kind of serves the player and feels kind of nice and dramatic and more puzzling, essentially. It's a way of managing space to make some new puzzles. This is, much like everywhere else where I've added a new mechanic, again, a safe place. The colour buttons you're going to work out by mistake, even because they're all there, all the different colours are represented, so you'd have to work very hard not to understand what was required of you in this level. It's hopefully a nice way of introducing that, and also kind of getting us started for the kind of the 10 levels where everything goes a little bit wrong. the idea, and I do it quite a few times in the next few levels, of environments that are more mechanical. So they shift shape, you press buttons in order to tweak the world around you. It's something I love in quite a few games. And it felt like a nice way of keeping things interesting without, having to introduce new characters, as I said before. And also here specifically, I wanted to split the characters because there's quite a few characters at this point. and Thomas is kind of at its perfect kind of balance. I think around 4 characters. So these kind of places where there's way more than that, it felt like they needed to be split into 2 groups, just to hopefully to keep the game a bit more fun and those relationships a bit more understandable by the player. So that's what this level is basically splitting those out, and hopefully the effect that you have in one area with one group of characters affects the other, and vice versa a few times, which is hopefully fun. So Thomas is gone. Hopefully that kind of surprised players, because he's obviously the main character. So making him the first character to be removed kind of throws people off a little bit and kind of makes people wonder what's going on, which is cool. I also had to front load in these levels anything I wanted to do with lots and lots of multiple characters, because they're all getting picked off. Spoilers. I needed to make sure that anything I wanted to do that had lots and lots of different characters interacting was done right at the start. So this is an example of a level like that where multiple characters are working together in different formations. This wouldn't work later on in the game, so it's a nice chance to play with some of those ideas. Chris had to be taken by the Pixel Cloud on his own. He's going to grow and learn and be a lovely human being eventually. But for now, I kind of felt like it was important that he was still not quite there. He wasn't quite with the others, and he kind of was distant. And I kind of wanted that to be kind of symbolized, I guess, symbolized by the way he goes in the end. And that's cool. And then obviously around that came this awesome idea. I'm doing a lot of very arrogant statements during this particular piece of commentary. The rest of it's all very humble. The idea of him kind of falling through that environment is hopefully quite fun. That's what's cool about Thomas, because the world's so abstracted. I'm kind of free to just do silly stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense. Why would he fall? Who would make a room this shape? Why doesn't he die horribly when he lands? All these kind of questions. But in Thomas, it kind of makes sense, and it means I can do something cool. I had to do a little bit of technical tweaking just to get the gravity and the kind of the camera working for this specific level, but hopefully it feels like a fun change of pace and kind of breaks up these levels a bit. And it's also kind of sad. Anyone who follows me on Twitter will know how obsessed I am with the Metal Gear Solid franchise. And one thing I love, a little moment, tiny little moment, is in Metal Gear Solid 2, on the tanker. There's a moment where you come up to a corner and you see a guard's shadow, and it tells you that a guard's around that corner. It's utterly pointless because you've got the radar, but it's a really cool, dramatic moment. I remember when I played that game on PlayStation, it was so... It was just innovative. It felt really different and cool and awesome. And I liked the fact that a graphical effect, so the shadow, was actually relevant to the gameplay and actually kind of gave me some information. And I wanted to do that here. So again, shadows, with this level, the shadows kind of act as an early warning system, so you know that something's going to fall on you because there's a shadow being cast. There's no other point in the game where that relationship is quite so specific, but I love it here. I think it works really nicely, and I'm really chuffed with how it came out. So I only had like one opportunity left to do a character ordering kind of puzzle with this and the bouncing before Laura's taken. So I kind of, with this one here, it's interesting. It's kind of, hopefully the geometry kind of misleads the player, and you see a lot of people kind of working on a few different possible solutions before they work out the correct puzzle solution here, which is kind of exactly what I wanted. It kind of, hopefully kind of messes players thinking up a little bit. And it's cool, and I think it works pretty well. I like the pairing of John and Claire. There's something quite nice because both of them are awesome and epic in their own fields. It's really nice because you have the ability to have big jumps and big cool moments, and we have a few of those where you jump up very high, and also there's that really subtle, obviously the power of Claire, which she can float. I really love. There's a nice moment here that I'm really happy with how it came out, which is where there's a submerged spike pit, and with a button above it as Claire. So you have to press the button and immediately move away in order not to hit the spikes. It's a tiny moment, but there's something that you haven't seen before, that kind of idea of Claire being in danger because of her superpower. And yeah, I think it works kind of well here. And this level's nice because it's kind of ponderous and it takes your time before the next level where I make people quite angry. Many timed challenges in this game or levels with a kind of a cut-off point or anything really that kind of forces them to be fast. This is one of them. It was a real challenge. It's a struggle for a lot of players because players try and do it at the same time with both characters, which is very, very nearly impossible. What you need to do is separate them out. And there's a problem here, I think, in terms of communication, that the player doesn't necessarily understand that they should do that, and will therefore become more and more frustrated repeating the same solution. So yeah, I'm not sure time puzzles are the best idea in this game, but it works and it feels dramatic, and it's visually very cool levels. So I think it does a lot of things right, but maybe the timed element could have been rethought. Never one to underplay anything, I then repeat and do another timed level directly after the one that annoys everyone, which was an interesting choice. This is kind of this is a race against time. You do only have one character now, so it's less frustrating in that sense. It could have done with a bigger gap before it, but it works. This also kind of emphasises John's loneliness and the fact that he's in quite a lot of danger at this point. It's a challenge for him to be in the world on his own. He's gotten used to people. He's gotten used to those little dots that seem so lame at the start. So being alone for him is a real struggle. And I like the fact that you're introduced to that setup with a challenging, difficult, scary level. So I think it works on that in that level. And this is the final moment of that kind of trifecta of mean levels. This one actually was designed to be frustrating, so I don't feel too bad about this one. You're meant to really struggle to get to the exit with this. I wanted John to really fight to escape, even though, and this is something that happens a lot in Thomas, there's never any choice on the player's part. There's never any ability for you to choose where you're going next, say for a portal. I really liked the idea of creating an emulation of that kind of relationship with the environment. So the idea that John's racing to get away. There's no way the player can obviously get away, but I really wanted them to feel that stress of trying to succeed. And the main reason for doing that is that then once they do finally succeed, at that point they fail anyway, which is that kind of classic horror movie thing of work, and then fail ultimately, and that's hopefully leaves kind of an uncomfortable feeling. I really want you to feel bad at the end of this level. Hopefully it's built up at this point. You've lost every character that you like, that's been introduced to you. This could very easily have been the end of the game, and I like the fact that the player is going to feel there's a definitive end to this section of the game. So putting these challenges right at the end hopefully kind of achieves that. this is James. He's another one of my favourite characters. He's intended to be the opposite of Thomas. He's kind of the anti-Thomas. This is something that lots of games do, and have the negative version of their main character. He's not evil, he's not mean in that way, but he's emotionally, hopefully, kind of the opposite. He's uncomfortable with the world, he's scared of the world, he's kind of... He's not a massive fan of groups of people either. It's established very early on that maybe he was bullied or he's uncomfortable around others. So hopefully kind of the complete inverse Thomas, which will become interesting when they meet. It's quite nice as well that he's physically the opposite of Thomas in terms of that he falls upwards, that he's got the anti-gravity. It's a nice way of bringing that mechanic in. And then little things like the fact that he's the opposite RGB value, which is a minor little nerdy thing to do, but one person in the world would realise prior to this commentary, and that's important, and that makes me feel clever at parties. I don't go to parties, I'm a game designer. Characters are different in this game, and that's obviously from a gameplay point of view, that's sort of the point, that they're different. And I like that different characters react to that difference differently. So Laura finds it hard to trust people because she feels she's being used because she's different. John is proud of his difference and feels much better than everyone else. Claire, her self-esteem is boosted by her difference. She feels she's a superhero, which is cool. And all the characters are different in this game, and that's obviously from a gameplay point of view, that's sort of the point, that they're different. And I like that different characters react to that difference differently. So Laura finds it hard to trust people because she feels she's being used because she's different. John is proud of his difference and feels much better than everyone else. Claire, her self-esteem, all the characters are different in this game, and that's obviously from a gameplay point of view, that's sort of the point, that they're different. And I like that different characters react to that difference differently. So Laura finds it hard to trust people because she feels she's being used because she's different. John is proud of his difference and feels much better than everyone else. Claire, her self-esteem is boosted by her difference. She feels she's a superhero, which is cool. And with James, I really wanted him to have a different reaction to his differentness. He feels different in a way that's uncomfortable. He feels that he's weird and odd and strange, and that makes him uncomfortable around people, and that's a valid response to feeling different, and it's one that you see a lot in the real world. And I kind of wanted to play with that kind of negative side of it, and that's what James is. James is defined by that difference. He entirely bases his view of himself on the fact that he's the odd one out, and that's not what's nice about the anti-gravity power, is that does make him the odd one out. It's not a variation in jumping, which is what most of the other abilities are. It's a complete inversion, literally, and that's cool. I really wanted to start building in more complex environment interactions. At the moment, up to this point, you did something in the world and you were immediately saw the kind of the output, the payoff of that. With this stuff, this is more indirect, so this is you're getting knocked by one thing into another thing, which is dangerous. So it's a nice little, two-step interaction, which feels good and hopefully varies things up. Also, here the player's still disoriented. Players don't get used to the gravity when it's anti-gravity quite as fast as before. Also, obviously, they've played the game up to this point, so they're still in that original mode. So it's quite fun putting them in this situation which requires them to time something and to time placement, because they are slightly disoriented by the environment they've been put into, and I have a little bit of fun at their expense as a result. And it's fun. It's a lot like that challenge earlier on with Claire. We had to unlearn the fact that you carried things across. Here you have to kind of relearn gravity and your relationship to it in order to proceed, and that's cool that players kind of struggle because of a learned skill that they have to kind of unlearn, rather than the fact that the game's challenging. I like that. And this is where Thomas comes back. I really ummed and ahed about how long I was going to leave it before you saw one of the original characters again. I was kind of worried that I wanted the loss to set in. I wanted the player to feel they missed those characters, but at the same time I kind of had to get it going again. And I didn't want to introduce these other world characters quite too quickly. I wanted to save Sarah, for example, for later. So bringing in Thomas at this point felt right. It kind of felt like the logical time. James has been established. The players got used to the fact that those characters are gone. So Thomas is a surprise. Here, I keep them separated, but it's for a slightly different reason than before. It's not to limit the player or make them feel constrained so that the later kind of access to the characters is more fun. It's mainly to introduce anti-gravity and gravity simultaneously. In most games, when you change gravity, the gravity change is either directed by the player at a thing they want to change the gravity of, or it's universal, so everything falls upwards. So there's a chance that players at this point in the game, because they've only seen James on the screen and he's new, they don't make the leap that James has different gravity to everyone else. They might just assume this is an anti-gravity world. So having Thomas separated off with the correct gravity in a way that they can see just kind of hopefully explains James's power in a way that they might have missed. I just wanted to do that very quickly before they move on to actually trying to make these characters interact. I love this level. It's awesome. It's kind of jazzy. It's a playful environment. The aim here was to get things moving around, get blocks moving in quite a fun, silly way, and change the environment in a way that's not been done before. Kind of these constant tweaks and fiddles to make everything feel odd and changing, and then actually have Thomas and James kind of interacting in that space in hopefully kind of a fun way that you can kind of start to think about some of the possibilities in terms of how you can use them together. It's zero threat, but hopefully it's kind of a fun, silly experience that goes back to that experiential stuff. So it feels odd and off and weird, and it feels fun and fast-paced, hopefully, without resorting to challenge, which comes in later. So this is the first time the player has to use these two characters together in a puzzle. It's actually quite a long way into this chapter before you're required to do that. This is the first time. And you use them to stepping stone each other. Part of the reason for doing this is actually to begin the player's journey towards a much more complex mechanic, which is the idea of having the two characters standing on top of each other and basically negating each other's gravity. Which is something that they come to later. There's quite a few levels where I kind of create these situations where you either half do it, i.e. a stepping stone, or you might accidentally do it, which is hopefully going to happen a few times. Players are going to accidentally find themselves floating in space, and it's nice because I see a lot of Let's Plays or YouTube comments where people are like, "Oh, I totally broke this level by getting the fact that you could do that on top of each other, these two characters on top of each other, way earlier than the designer intended." I always intended you to work it out, and I intended for you to feel clever when you did. Sorry to burst your bubble. You're a lovely person, and I'm sure you're very, very good at computer games. But that's the intention, is hopefully that these two characters being put in this situation will kind of guide you on your own to find what is probably the most complex concept to grasp in the game. So this is another indirect level. This is a level where the two characters are not kind of directly interacting with each other. There's a symmetry as well. There's basically both characters are going on almost the same moves. There's a few different variations just to keep it interesting, but predominantly they're progressing in exactly the same way. This is something I couldn't do very often. A symmetrical level with two characters doing exactly the same thing would not be very entertaining if it was done lots and lots and lots. But aesthetically, I just love the symmetry of this level, and I kind of wanted to have at least one level where I kind of acknowledge the fact that the characters are the same in terms of their jump heights, for example, and actually make a level where you're playing 2 levels simultaneously. Like I said, only something I can't do. It's not something I can do very often, but it was a nice thing to do just this once. This is taking that stepping stone idea a little bit further. So this is the idea that you can you can use one character to move another, to act as a stepping stone for another, to help with jump distance. I think this level, there's a bit of bad communication going on with the moving platforms. The point of moving platforms is essentially to catch you if you get a character past the point where they're useful. There's certain places where you can break this level theoretically by moving the wrong character too far. And those moving platforms are kind of a way of backing out of that so you can get back into the game without dying. What the problem is, though, is up to this point all moving platforms are there to be jumped on, so players see the moving platform and immediately assume that's part of the solution to the problem, which is a problem with this level, and I've seen people get confused by it. It's an odd one because partially that's kind of cool because it means that it's a puzzle for them to work out, but also I think players feel a little bit cheated. They feel like they've been told to do something that didn't work. So that's one that I would probably tweak if I was doing it again. This is a death tunnel, according to the file name. This is a cool one. I like this one. Basically, yeah, you have to use each character. It's a lot like the symmetrical level from before, but it's more asymmetric because of the movement of the pieces and the fact that there are safe zones you have to get the characters into. Otherwise, one will get killed while you're moving the other one. And it feels nice and it feels dramatic. Again, not something we can do too much in the game because people would get bored of it, but by doing this again, but with much more hazard, I think it feels kind of dramatic. The checkpoints here make this level far more fun, but pre-checkpoints, this level was absolutely awful because you get to the end piece with those kind of chomping pieces, and if you just got one character accidentally placed in the wrong place, you have to go back to the start of the entire game. This was one of the levels which kind of playtesters used to talk me into bothering to put checkpoints in. I'm very, very glad that they did because it's made the game a lot better. But yeah, it's cool. It's a nice, dangerous corridor. It's a good level. this is the moment where all of that stepping stone stuff is actually used for a mechanic. So you have to float the two characters on top of each other through an environment. Hopefully by this point you've already worked this out for yourself. I actually chickened out a little bit, so I spawned the characters in the position of being on top of each other, which was a bit of a wimpy move on my part. If you mess that up though, if you break it, if you immediately change your position, that stone, that notch on the side is there to kind of help you back in. But yeah, it's hopefully it's a culmination. It's the point where the player feels they've beaten the game. They've worked something out a bit quicker than the game was willing to show them, which I don't know how often that works, but it feels like the right time to introduce this mechanic in terms of actually having to force the player to do it. And yeah, it's interesting. The gravity thing started off as a bug. It started off that basically the two characters, because obviously on paper I was like, oh, Thomas would be cool if he could jump, and it would be cool if there was another character that jumped the wrong way, the anti-gravity thing. But I never actually worked out what would happen if the two landed on top of each other, and it was only then when I got these characters into the game and put them together, I jumped them on top of each other and realised that they cancel each other out. It was very buggy, I had to tweak a few things, but it was really interesting, and it made complete sense in a really weird kind of game logic-y way, which I liked. So I went with it. And I think it's fun. I think it kind of defines these levels quite nicely. I love double jumping in games. It feels nice. It adds a kind of a tactical choice element to jumping, which is quite cool. And that's why Sarah's in the game. I wanted to get one of them in. She also kind of kicks up the tempo. She's there to introduce a new mechanic, which changes the way the game's played. But also from a story point of view, she kind of is the reason that everything gets pushed towards the climax it does. That she's basically there as an agent, pushing the story forward, setting up the goals of the characters from that point on. And she's also epic. I really like the idea of getting a little bit of exploration into the game, so looking around and seeing what was going on. Obviously that's kind of hard to do in a puzzle platformer without the player kind of feeling like they've missed the point or got lost. And the idea of hunting for things became cool, and I had these switches, so I thought, okay, I'll make a level where you move around hunting down the switches and jumping on them in order to progress. And I made this level, but the problem is with the playtesters, they got lost, they got confused as to where they were meant to be going, what they were meant to be doing, and it frustrated people. It didn't feel like a puzzle or a game level because it was so unguided and it just felt boring. The kind of the spotlight was a weird side effect. I'd made spotlights for another part of the game and then decided they weren't quite working and removed them. And this was a perfect opportunity to find a new use for a spotlight, so it's kind of moving around. At the start of the level, it feels like an aesthetic thing, and you look around, and then once you realise it's tied into where the switches are, it becomes a waypoint system kind of for that one level, just something to point you towards where you should be going. And you're still exploring a bit because you're working out your path to where you're trying to go to. There's a point where a switch appears on the bottom of the platform when you were expecting to be on the top, things like that. But it kind of just guides the experience in a nice way. This puzzle here is about teaching the player to do something that's a bit counterintuitive. If you're not someone who's played many puzzle platformers, and to be fair, with some puzzle platformers this doesn't work, but something I really wanted Sarah to be able to do was this kind of slingshot move. So you would jump her in one direction and then use the double jump to push her back in the direction you came from. The idea being that you could kind of avoid an obstacle in midair, so you could jump around something. This is hopefully a really kind of straightforward blank canvas for you to try that move out of. It's kind of like the level where Chris is introduced for the first time. It's kind of quite a little amount of lighting, not a lot going on the screen. Hopefully it just gives you enough room to kind of come to that conclusion on your own. And it's quite fun when you see someone who's not maybe a big puzzle platformer game fan who sits down in front of this. The moment they work out the slingshot, they feel really good. They feel like they've worked out something, and it feels a little bit exploity as well, which I think people get a kick out of. So yeah, that's what this is. This is a setup for doing that later, basically. Sarah was probably the kind of the hardest character to write for, because she's kind of got this whole epic thing going on. She kind of feels She should hopefully feel a bit Tolkien-esque, a bit kind of a bit like she's walked in from Game of Thrones. I kind of wanted her to feel aloof and different to the other characters in the scene, kind of sort of like Thor, I guess, in the Marvel comics, that she just sounds a bit off and a bit uncomfortable around everyone else as a result, but doesn't realise how weird she sounds. Getting that right was really hard, making it so that didn't seem weird, or getting unintentional laughs from it was odd. I think most of the time we stay on just the right side, but it was a challenge, and it kind of distances her, which I quite like. I quite like that she feels kind of separate from the group, and I think a lot of that's achieved by the writing and by the way Danny performed the part. So with this level, it's really about kind of targeting a space vertically. This is something that I've not required you to do before, and you can't really do without Sarah. There's a gap that you have to get through, which if you get it slightly wrong in either direction, you'll die. And it forces you to really think spatially about where that jump's placed, where you use that second jump in order to keep yourself out of harm's way. It's teaching the player to finesse. Hopefully, it's teaching them to play Sarah in a way that they actually think about where they're going, and they use that space and use the character's ability to get the perfect jump, to specifically achieve an objective. I don't force it on the player often, and when I do, I try and do it in a very simple space like this. But it's quite fun. It feels good to the player because you do it well and you feel good. This is a weird one. This level is an excellent example of something very odd that happens. I've talked to other indies, and it happens to most indies. When you're working in a studio, you're sat in a professional environment, an office, you're surrounded by pros, and you get the job done, and maybe you listen to music, but you just kind of get on with it. With Thomas, I built it at home, and I was sat next to my television at home on my computer, and I like background noise, so I'd put films on. And weirdly, this specific level I made while watching some obscure old Robert Downey Jr. movie. So for me, this level immediately, this is no insight on the game design, and I apologise for wasting your time, but this level always makes me think of Robert Downey Jr. And it's weird how those kind of, it's a weird phenomenon that indies, often like bits of games that we've worked on, will be coloured by whatever movie we had on or whatever TV show we had playing while we were working on that level. So this level for me is Robert Downey Jr.'s level. No insight at all on the game design there. Wasting your time. So this is kind of the place where that balancing two characters on top of each other mechanic kind of gets made more complex. So you have a third character in it that you have to kind of factor in your choices, and you have to kind of carry one character across, switch, and take the other one back. You also can die to get the achievement there in the bottom corner. But it's really about just extrapolating on that concept that you learned and mastered earlier, and just taking it off in a different direction, and this time with Sarah to make that a bit more interesting. This is the Fountain of Knowledge or Wisdom, depending on which bit of dialogue I'm using at that specific point. And this was a cool thing. I'm quite proud of this one. This had to be a big moment, because this is the moment where Thomas kind of becomes self-aware. This is the moment where they realise the context they're in, they realise about the outside world, and it kind of establishes that. It's also a chance to do a really big, cool particle effect, which I'm quite proud of. Interesting little bit of trivia, the images that are flowing past there are the Twitter avatars of all of my Twitter followers who replied yes please to a tweet from me saying, would you like to be in a particle effect in Thomas Was Alone? So those are the true believers. I had way less Twitter followers back then. And yeah, it's a cool moment. It's also a really interesting moment for Sarah, because this is obviously Sarah's like objective and dream was to get into this fountain, and she is cruelly kind of separated out from it, and the layout of the level kind of forces her to watch the exact moment where Thomas achieves her dream and she doesn't. And the kind of the story does some fun stuff around that, but it's a nice kind of there's a nice kind of mix here of one character feeling awesome and the other character being, you know, feeling less awesome. And I think it works. 69 actually was an attempt to go back to that earlier level, the level I think I described it as jazzy, where the environment's changing, but this time let the player change their environment. So the player's kind of forming the level for themselves here. So you move the platforms into position by pressing switches, which allows another character to get to a new switch, which they can then use to get to a new switch. And there's a nice kind of progression and back and forth through the level. This was also, from a game designer point of view, this was a really fun level to put together, because I had to work out kind of the geometry that would allow for this, so that you had this world changing but nothing broke and it looked cool in all of its formations. And it was a really fun level to make. I hope it's as fun to play as it was to make, as it was an interesting challenge to make all those pieces look good and move around in a fun way. So building on the idea of the player kind of editing their environment, this was another idea. This was one of those experiential things where it didn't really come from a puzzle per se. It came from an idea that I thought would be quite fun visually and from a player perspective. So this is a box which gets smaller and smaller and smaller as you interact with it, and kind of compresses the player characters down in space. It felt really nice mechanically. I got into a stage with some of these levels around this area where it became about making the level really interesting in the way that it moved or changed, and trying to achieve kind of an aesthetic, emotive sense to these levels. Because by this point the player knows the mechanics, so I'm freer to do that. I don't do it much, and you've got to pace that with content which is perhaps a bit more fun, or a bit more, you know, immediately puzzling or interesting in that sense. But I think just taking a moment to have a few levels that are just cool in the way they work is something that I know I appreciate in games. I love it in the game in Edge, where I think it's called Metro, where there's a level. This is a game made up entirely of cubes, where it feels like an underground train station, and they achieve that purely by moving some cubes around in a way that feels interesting. And I kind of wanted to play around with some ideas like that. So these levels coming up, the objective here was to complete all of the character arcs, because as you know, spoilers, this is the point where we actually leave these characters behind. And all of them have a journey they have to go on. So I'll talk a little bit more as we go through, but essentially the first character to deal with is Thomas. Thomas's journey, and no one gets this except for there's 3 or 4 people, and that's my failing. That's absolutely my failing. But what I was going for, what I was hoping people would kind of take away from Thomas is a creative. He's someone who wants to make. He doesn't start off wanting to make stuff that's cool. He's very interested in the world. He sees things. He's observant. He's having fun just looking at the world. And then he kind of discovers that he doesn't like certain things about this world. And that's the point during these levels where he decides to change things. He decides to create something, and he creates these new characters who go on to achieve what he wanted to achieve originally. And it's nice. It feels like a nice kind of illustration of that creative process. Of kind of creative people tend to, at least the ones I've met, tend to be really, really interested in everything, and I kind of like it's not part of the process that I've really seen depicted, and I kind of like the idea of Thomas being that guy who has to know why that thing works the way it does, and is intrigued by the world around him. And I don't think the players necessarily realise that straight away, but I hope that during these kind of levels you realise that that's the journey Thomas has come on, towards kind of becoming a creative. recreate all. So this is a chance to do something that I'm surprised I don't do much of in the game up to this point, and I think I would probably go back and do a little bit more of it. Is moving targets. Is having targets where time is a factor in the placement as well. So here it's really simple. I basically have 2 position sets. And you just have to move your characters into one of those sets, which is fine. What's interesting is because the sets keep moving, most players, as they're putting this together, lose track of which set they're trying to build, and that's where the puzzle comes in, is just paying attention to which layout you're attempting. Both are possible, obviously, but doing half of one and half of the other is not it's not going to win you the level. So it's a fun one from that point of view, that it kind of plays with players' perceptions a little bit. It's also quite a nice one-screen level. There's not many of these in the game, but I do like pulling them out every now and again. It's a nice way of mixing things up a bit, and aesthetically I just really like one level, one screen, and that's how the Flash game worked, of course. So the other story that they needed to be kind of continued and completed was this story of how John reacts to Sarah. Is that Sarah basically is John, but more so. And I really like the idea of him being massively intimidated at first by that and jealous, but actually that freeing him a little bit, because he doesn't need to be insecure, because there is someone who's demonstrably better at jumping than he is. And he kind of comes to terms with that and likes the idea of making other people feel awesome about themselves. He becomes much more selfless. He starts off very selfishly at the start of the game, and through his interactions with Sarah becomes the selfless character, which is really cool. And obviously at the very end of these levels, where he's useless to this new, there are no yellow trigger zones later on. He is not going to be a part of this success. And he's kind of okay with that, because he feels he's facilitated it and he's helped out with it. So that's a nice journey, and I like the way John progresses, and I like the way that his story ends. mentioned earlier the how late the checkpoints came in, and that was a very late addition to the game, and I think I pointed out that was pretty stupid. This is the mechanic I added 2 weeks before launch. I was playing for the first time. I tried FIFA. I was playing a football video game, not playing football, and I hated it, but I liked the idea of a ball, and it kind of rooted in my mind. I wanted to add a ball to Thomas, and I didn't want to, it wasn't going to go in too many levels, but I liked the idea of having 1 or 2 places where it fit. And I knew that during these kind of levels, you have been with the same characters for a little while, so introducing a new mechanic kind of felt logical and felt like it would be good for the player's kind of sanity. So the ball obviously became a diamond because curves do not exist in this universe. And it became quite a cool little physics object you bounce around. It caused quite a few headaches in terms of the way character interactions work, because physics in Thomas is not realistic. It's kind of, it's not realistic obviously because it's a video game jump, but actually more so than that in terms of when you carry characters, the fact that they don't slide off you, for example. So there's quite a bit of tweaks and fiddling going on behind the scenes to make the game feel the way I wanted it to feel, and the ball kind of contradicts a lot of that. So it became quite a bit more challenging than I thought it was going to be. But it actually adds, I think, a lot to these last few levels of with these characters, that you play with it in an interesting way. The fact that it's got the diagonals on it means that the way you interact with it is kind of akin to a football, that you're kind of bouncing it around the level and kind of specifically kind of hitting it from different sides in order to change its direction, things like that. And the big challenge actually was working out how to make it interact with the existing systems in the game. Making it a specific Switch variant was the kind of the perfect solution. That it felt logical, the player understood it, and it used it used a way of communicating that had been set up before in a nice way, and it fits into the existing systems. So this is similar to some of the stuff I do earlier in the game with multiple areas with different characters interacting indirectly. But what's nice about the ball was that it allowed me to make levels like this one, where you have different characters in different areas interacting with one object that gets moved around and passed around in different ways. And that was cool because it meant I could kind of separate the characters but have an object that moves between them. Because you don't directly control the ball, it becomes a kind of a passive object in the world that you have to interact with in interesting ways. It's basically kind of like, I guess, the companion cube from Portal, that it becomes something that takes on a meaning because it's something that's passed between different characters in this scene. So yeah, I really like this level. I never did get on the bottom right of the water, the particle effect kind of bleeds out of the wall, and I hate that. I never got that right, and I never worked out how to fix that problem. So yeah, half-finished game. So this was a point where I realised that there was an interesting possibility for an interaction between Sarah and Laura. I'd not played with those two before. Because Sarah has that mid-air jump, if she bounces once and then jumps in mid-air, you actually get some quite interesting movement out of her. So the idea of an environment where you could play with that, where you kind of combined the bounce with the secondary jump, felt cool, and that's what this level became. And it weirdly becomes Pong or Breakout or any of those kind of games, and in a way that I really like. It's kind of nostalgic, and it kind of works. It's fun. It's a little bit repetitive potentially, but I do like it, and I really like the nod to Pong. So this is another area where the characters are kind of divided. I had quite a bit of... it was quite an important piece of story here. This is the moment where Thomas does decide to basically change the world. So I deliberately kept this one pretty simple. This isn't a very challenging environment. It's more of just somewhere for you to interact with and exist for a little while until we get... so basically so you can hit the story beat. There's a couple of places in the game where I deliberately kind of slow the pace while something important's being said in the story. This is just a good example of one such place where it was important to kind of step back and let that dialogue from Danny, which I'm talking over right now, play out, so you can just see what's going on. I loved as a kid the game Mousetrap, and this is kind of my ode to Mousetrap. It's similar to a couple of the other levels that you've got kind of a sequence of different characters interacting with the same ball, but here it's much more specifically a journey that ball's going on from one end of the level to another, and that feels... I really like this level. It's... like I said, it's a nod to Mousetrap. It takes you in some interesting directions. There's also some quite cute ideas in there around the kind of when that little lever that kind of flips the ball upwards that you catch in midair with James. Stuff like that just kind of grew out organically as the level was being designed. And it just feels nice. It feels sufficiently different in terms of the way you interact with it than any previous level. And it goes back to that kind of thing I was talking about earlier of the experiential element. That this level's so much more about how it feels than how challenging it is to work out. Okay, so this is, again, kind of still riffing off the idea of characters in separate rooms, but what's cool here is the approach has been to make those several rooms join together, so you're kind of opening up the space and the characters kind of overlap in interesting ways. This one was really about the way the paths work for the characters, so you feel like you've really travelled this space. You take characters from one end to another, you take some characters just slightly over to the side. You've got Laura and Sarah there just kind of on their own, bouncing away as a nice little metronome for the level. You've got kind of an interesting journey for each of the characters in this level, and they're all overlapping, so it's a level that feels really good because they're separate, but they're also kind of overlapping constantly, and some of the puzzles require more than one of them at once. So this is the last environment for these characters, which was a controversial choice on my part, to say the least. This is the point where they essentially overcome what they are. They become heroes. Claire passes on her skill, Sarah passes on hers, Laura passes on hers. Oh my god, I've just realised that most of the characters that give up their powers selflessly are female. I don't know what I was trying to say there, except James. James is male, so that ruins any reading like that. And it's a nice moment where basically I hope that most players assume that this is a game about characters escaping. I hope that most players assume when they start the game that the last level will be Thomas escaping. And I like to subvert that. I like the fact that these characters don't get out, that they become part of the system, that they essentially give themselves so that the others can escape. There's a certain kind of heroism there. There's almost a mythical quality of them kind of sacrificing themselves for their kind. It also had to feel pretty epic, so that kind of final moment where the characters step into the Matrix. There is a hopefully a cool feeling to that. They're also, the way they're arranged means that the characters whose traits are not carried over are not in the particle effect, not in the Matrix itself. They're kind of out to the side, which probably no one notices, but is a nice little moment for just kind of establishing what might happen next. I didn't want to make it clear how they were going to affect the world, so I couldn't say too much at this point, but I hope that on a second playthrough players kind of spot that all when they listen to this. This is a new character. I'm not sure what players expect. I hope that the ones that have been paying attention kind of realise that the characters up to this point are now gone. I wonder if some of them think that this is going to be a continuation like before, but hopefully that loss kind of sets in. With Grey, there's a few things about Grey that are important. One is he's grey. And that's actually a functional thing, that all these characters are grey because their colours, once they start to gain their abilities, needed to show up. So grey became a logical thing. So they're all shades of grey. Having the first character introduced, coloured grey, I think kind of helps that to take a little bit longer to sink in. So players kind of just accept that the character's called Grey. Grey is an interesting character here because he is essentially the fall from grace. He starts off kind of optimistic, a little bit arrogant. He immediately kind of judges the world for allowing him to be awesome, which is a very odd reaction to success. But he becomes darker and darker as levels go on, and well, eventually kind of obviously betrays everyone. So it's cool. This level, the main focus of this level was to frame the moment where the player gains the floating in water ability. They don't know what these shapes are. It's kind of classic Mario thing of you can't fail to get them at water ability, but I wanted to make sure that moment felt cool. I wanted to kind of echo that moment where Claire becomes aware that she's got superpower. But the idea that Grey starts off without one and then gains one during this sequence it's basically, if I can get the player to learn during these moments that that's how those things work, then this level's achieved its objective, both from a gameplay perspective and obviously narratively. So Joe and Sam are the couple, kind of long-term couple of the game. They're interesting. They have a good relationship. Joe starts off a little bit, I guess, whiny, but comes around very quickly. And they're cool. The purpose of this level obviously is to kind of build on what we've just seen with Grey and introduce the idea of these two characters shifting their abilities. The fact that you can shift to an ability for one character without shifting the ability of the other, things like that, just kind of extrapolating on the learning from the previous level, hopefully in an environment that's pretty safe. The only skill that's required in this level is jumping, and obviously by this point you know how to jump. The whole game's kind of trained you in that. So again, hopefully kind of a safe environment in which to learn. Water obviously had to be there, so there had to be some hazard, but again, hopefully that's mitigated. This is an interesting environment. The plan here was to just basically play very briefly with what Grey can do. So here he's floating upwards. This is slightly different to anti-gravity because obviously anti-gravity you can jump. Whereas in this level, because it's water, you can't jump down from the ceiling. So it became a case of there's a challenge to that the player gets stuck or can find their way onto. They can't opt out of falling on spikes. So it kind of works in an interesting way. It's not actually water. It's kind of faking it. He's basically, for this level, Gray is treated like an anti-gravity character. It's a total cheat, but it kind of hopefully introduces the idea that a character can, for an entire level, be of a certain ability. It's also, to be honest, a cool moment. It's kind of an inverted version of Chris's fall from earlier, so I like it for that reason. So this is, things are pacing up at this point. By this point, I'm less inclined to give people safe space to learn a new mechanic, because at this point you've been playing the game for a while, you get it. I like to think that the challenges of the game are such that you accept that you're now going to be in danger from this point on. So here is obviously the big introduction of the fact that there can be more than one ability in a space. It's important to establish this kind of quite early on, because I didn't want players to get confused by what happened if they had one ability and then they flipped to another ability. Do those abilities get combined? Do they then have both of those abilities? And it had to be a toggle for lots of reasons. It would have been very, very difficult to make levels fun. It would also have been very hard to allow players to disable an ability, which is obviously a big part of some of the puzzles later on. So yeah, with this one, it was really about teaching the player how to logically progress through a space where they had the opportunity to change their abilities, and also how they could combine two characters with different abilities to win. So you have to carry one character on another character here, you have to bounce one character on another character there. It's just a way of establishing that the relationship of characters becomes actually kind of even weirder than it has previously, because whereas before, obviously Laura's ability is static, she's always going to bounce things, whereas here you can kind of tweak what a character is. You can mod characters to be whatever you need them to be, and then that gets piled on with their kind of inherent traits in terms of their size and their jump height to make their own new characters. So there's lots of permutations that happen, and giving that in an environment that's kind of straightforward and kind of a logical linear progression. There's a reason the level's kind of really straightforward in terms of you go from right to left. It's just really simple, just to kind of let players work that out for themselves, but this time in a bit more of a dangerous environment. So here I'm establishing Paul as his own character. There's a lot of reasons to do it on his own. Just kind of narratively, I just wanted to establish him before he's put into a scenario with Gray. The kind of the new mechanic here, gameplay-wise, is the fact that your relationship to the environment shifts. So as you progress through this level, sometimes you can float, sometimes you can't, and those shifts are forced on you. You don't have a choice. And what that does is that just kind of reiterates the fact that that shifting can be both a negative thing and a positive thing. And that's kind of important for later, because there will be points later where you have to avoid trigger zones in order to progress and to survive. So here's another example of a level that's kind of intentionally pretty simple, just to kind of allow the player to get used to a narrative point. So this is the point where Gray and Paul meet. The player needs to understand that Gray's starting to be a bit dodgy, and that he's going to betray Paul. That he's going to take all this information that Paul tells him and use it in a bad way. So it's kind of a simple level, but also there is some interesting spatial stuff going on that you have to kind of adjust the positions of Paul and Gray on those steps in order to get the bounce right. There's a few different ways of doing it, but it's kind of interesting. This is one that there's a lot of little different changes in the way you play this level, and I like that about it. I like that players can find their own solution. So this, and I do this a lot with these two characters, this is a kind of a journey level, so this is really just kind of progressing in a straightforward way from left to right. But hopefully what I'm going for is that this is actually a really interesting back and forth between the characters. So you're using them and switching their abilities up in order to get them to kind of leapfrog the other character into the position you need them in. So again, this is one that's not so much the puzzle as the feeling of it, and hopefully it's a fun journey. I want the player to really warm to these characters for reasons that should hopefully become very obvious. This is an opportunity to add a new trigger zone. So here we have obviously the double jump, which came from Sarah. This is to be honest, again, a quite straightforward environment, but just enough room that the player can work out what it is. There's a lot of communication going on in terms of hopefully explaining to you what each kind of thing does, what each different ability shift does. Obviously the colours are the same colours as the characters they're from. That's something that a lot of people don't actually pick up on. But it's still required to give these environments that kind of act as a sandbox for the player to work out what an ability shift does. Also, it's nice because it lets me do little character moments at the same time as introducing these new mechanics. So this level came from a lot of different things. There's a couple of different mechanics, or not mechanics, but kind of interactions I wanted to play with here. One was the idea of a challenging trigger zone to get to that then makes the journey away from it easy. So right at the start, that water trigger zone is kind of hard to get to. You have to jump across lots of stepping stones, with the hazard and danger obviously being water, but then you get the water ability and then you just cruise through the water, and it's a nice moment where you feel empowered. So that's the first thing. The second thing I really wanted to play with was the idea of jumping into a trigger zone in midair and then using that ability, falling into a trigger zone and then using that ability while you were in the trigger zone, which I also do later on. So those two kind of little moments of interaction that I kind of wanted the player to experience. The first one is purely an experiential thing. The second thing is more of kind of a puzzle to just work out. That's how you're meant to interact with it. And both of them are obviously used quite a bit later on. So with this level, this was one that kind of grew out of the work I was doing on the other levels kind of around it. It's an example of a level that kind of the mechanics are there mainly because I just liked the way they interacted with each other. So there's a lot of really interesting overlapping kind of movements that you're doing in this environment, going back on yourself, using, changing ability mid-air, water not being a threat, because all the water in this level is obviously surrounded in that blue trigger zone. It means that water becomes a buoyant interaction. You actually have to use the buoyancy, I believe, for the first time in the game in order to hit the switch on the right. So there's a really kind of interesting interaction that takes place here that I wanted to play with, and I think kind of is quite fun. So Team Jump, I love Team Jump. Team Jump, the main purpose of Team Jump was to bring a little bit more humour into the game. I really wanted to have a group of characters who were a bit silly, a bit stupid, to be honest, and a bit fun. The other interesting thing with Team Jump is Team Jump were actually how this game originally was envisaged. When I first started thinking about these mechanics many years ago, I imagined kind of a group of characters all the same that you could basically kind of stack up and make kind of I don't know the word for it, but those kind of gymnast poses where you stack up a bunch of people on at the same time. I wanted to do that kind of thing with characters in the game, and it kind of, in the context of the game I was thinking about, it didn't really work, but in this context it felt like actually adding a bunch of characters who were all essentially identical, and then getting the player to build them into towers or get them to help each other out became really interesting and became something that was a different style of gameplay. The other characters, because they're all so unique, you kind of think of them as unique entities and use them as such, whereas with these, because they're all the same, I kind of hoped that they would be seen as one unit, and it became a case of almost having a transforming shape character in the game. And I'm a massive Transformers geek, so so that was fun. But yeah, I'm kind of, I feel there's more puzzles to be done with Team Jump. I might have to revisit them one day. This is another one of my favourite levels, actually. There's a few things going on here that I just think are really cool. The main one, obviously, is there's current to the water. I programmed this into water the moment I made water. It was very easy. It was actually easier to make the water have a current to it and actually kind of pull the player across than it was to make, the water buoyant. So they always had a movement to them, but I never really worked out a puzzle that kind of suited it. It always felt frustrating, or if you played with it, it felt like it was kind of helping you win by default. And this was a fun level to make because I got to use that current in an interesting way. So there's points where that current can be dangerous because it can knock you into things that hurt you. But the bit that I really love in this level, and it's something that I had to tweak things a little bit for, was there are moments where in order to win you have to intentionally sink into the water. But because the water has a currency of it, has a current going through it, you're then swept into a trigger zone which saves you, kind of an underwater save, which is something that doesn't exist in the rest of the game. I really worried that players wouldn't get it and they would kind of avoid it because they'd see it as dangerous. But by doing that, it just breaks the mechanics in a really charming way that you kind of have to sacrifice your characters in order to, by default, be saved by that secondary trigger zone. And I'm just really chuffed with it. It came together. It felt really good. It was hard. I had to fiddle with some code to make it work, but it's a really nice moment. I'm really chuffed with. And then that's it really. There's so much going on in this level. It's just it's a very Thomas Was Alone level, and I'm really chuffed with it. So this is something, a mechanic that I kind of really wanted to bring in, which is the idea of avoiding trigger zones. The trigger zones become dangerous just in and of themselves. So here you have, like, right at the top there at the end, you have those blank trigger zones which are intersecting with the water as you swim across. You have to avoid those in order to not turn away from being buoyant and sink. You have to kind of avoid those. And it was really interesting to take something that the player has up to this point used, basically has empowered them, and then to make that a hazard that they have to avoid. And that's something that can only really be achieved once the players getting the system. They've been through enough challenges with it. They understand how these trigger zones operate. You can start introducing these kind of abstract repurposing, I guess, of the existing mechanics. So it works really nicely, I think. Yeah, it's fun. And it becomes a little bit Frogger, which is quite charming. I should apologise. I've just been reminded that the things I've been referring to for the entirety of this commentary as trigger zones are in fact shifters. It's fine, I wrote the script but I forgot the words. So I've been reminded of that, so I will now endeavour to call them shifters. I apologise if I've been talking nonsense. I've probably been talking nonsense. Well done to you, by the way, for staying with me this long. A lot of people will have listened to the first few levels, had a good time, and then kind of moved on with their day. But you've really stuck it out, and that makes you special, and I appreciate that. Okay, so this environment. This environment is all about that shifting back and forth, but in a really kind of frequent way. It's kind of hopefully kind of a constant bounce back and forth. This was where I started to give in to my love of V. and wanted to the indie game where you switch gravity. This is the next few levels are kind of ode to that. Anti-gravity, having anti-gravity in the game as well as blanks makes for some really interesting puzzles, because you actually have the alternation that is in the game V. It's not player controlled in that way, but it means you can do some really interesting kind of spatial puzzles. This is a very slow introduction. The biggest thing here was to introduce anti-gravity in a way that didn't confuse the player, and that they didn't have to make decisions too quickly. So every choice you make here has a delay on it. There's no shifters that switch you from blank to anti-gravity immediately. You always have a chance to decide on your tactic and to adjust accordingly. I get to the fast stuff in a moment. And this is that moment. This is the bit where you kind of get stuck in an alternation loop. This was from the moment I knew I was going to have the shifters at the end of the game. This was kind of the first level that came to mind, mainly because it's ripped off from V. This idea of being forced to loop back and forth. Mine's a lot nicer. I don't kill you as much because I didn't want to. And yeah, you kind of progress these characters through. What's really interesting here is playing with the different distances these characters travel, because of their differences in mass. They kind of each have a different way of interacting. So as you can see there, Joe and Sam move a lot more than Gray does, and that's cool, because that means that you can have a lot of fun with the space. And as the blocks progress, you have different routes. It would surprise me massively if every player plays through this by taking the characters the same path. You've got a lot of options there, and I like the fact that you're going to find different ways through the space with each of the different characters, and probably different ways than everyone else who's played it. So yeah, it's one of those kind of freer puzzles that I quite like. So I said before that the game is at its best when you have 2 or maybe 3 characters on screen at the same time. This level has, I believe, 9 characters, or is it 8? Might be 8. I think it's 8. I'll tell you why I think it's 9. It's because it was 9. Or 10, one of the two, but I actually removed one of the team jump. That was mainly because on a computer keyboard the numbers didn't go high enough that I could have a game which had that many characters in. I didn't really consider it, but I had to go without one of the team jump members, which would be fine if there wasn't a piece of dialogue in this level specifically referencing the fact that there are 5 members in team jump. Most people don't notice it unless I point it out. So yeah, hopefully I got away with it until you saw this. If you did get it, well done, you're very clever. Please don't tell anyone, it'll be our little secret. The environment is actually, this is probably the longest level in the game. This is one that most people take a good 5 to 10 minutes to work their way through. It's kind of frustrating as a result. I would, honestly, if I were to do it over, I would probably break this into several different levels and kind of allow you to go through each of these puzzles separately. But I didn't. So this is the level. It's quite long. Enjoy it. So this level's all about annoying the player. So that really here the shifters are placed in such a way that basically every shifter in this map is there to kill you. So you have to be very careful about where you tread, about getting characters past difficult shifters that would cause them problems. And that becomes the focus for the player, is kind of avoiding shifters, but more importantly, just playing in a way that's intelligently avoiding them so that you can get through the level. I really like this level, and it was horrible before checkpoints. With checkpoints, it's actually, I think, one of the more interesting levels, because you progress through it, you get a few setbacks, but you carry on. And yeah, it's cool. I like it. When I said there are a few levels that came to mind when I added the anti-gravity shifters to the game. The last one was the obvious kind of the V one, but this was the other one, was the idea of a falling room where we get bands of anti-gravity and blanks kind of passing through the environment, which means that you're constantly alternating. All of your characters just alternate every few seconds between the two states. And I liked that. I liked the idea of playing around with the players' kind of environment and their expectations, and making it so that what is quite a straightforward map, if you were just in one of these states, becomes an interesting challenge because you have to kind of factor in the different options. This is also, just being a bit arrogant for a little while, this is a motif that I use in quite a few games. So a lot of games I've worked on have included a bit where a small box falls through a tunnel. I don't know why, I just like the shape of that. So for example, the last boss fight of Invincible Tiger, which was an XBLA game I worked on, that takes place in a very, very similar environment. It's a thing I try and get into as many games as I can because I just think it's aesthetically interesting and feels dramatic. So this is the penultimate level of the game, and yeah, the real thing here, I had to have the last kind of puzzle of the game. I didn't want to do that in the very last level of the game because I wanted the last level of the game to really just kind of tie up the story and be an experience kind of focus level rather than a puzzle. So this was the environment where I really wanted to play with the puzzle and play with those interactions. And the idea of the kind of, I called them during development, I think I called these the brush elevators or something, where basically you have a different shifter of each type that's been introduced, minus the anti-gravity for obvious reasons, there's no roof. And you can basically choose which character you want to go into which of those shifters to progress through. And while there's a bit of wiggle room, there is really only kind of one solution. There's a few different kind of tweaks. You can use character A or character B to do the same job. But I liked that. I liked the idea of one last puzzle which the player hopefully kind of would have to fiddle with and have to work out with just before I get to that kind of final story moment. this is it. This is the last level of the game. This is the moment that the whole story's been leading up to. You've got two characters with the separate shifter abilities. I don't play with them too much within the bulk of the level. I wanted you to use these two characters in an interesting way together to progress through, because obviously that's what the whole game has been about. And this to me really is the moment where everything hopefully comes together. We've got a nice minimalist environment which has some cool effects work, which I'm chuffed with and I think works. We've got that incredible last piece of music that David did, which I genuinely think is just one of the most moving pieces of video game music I've ever heard. With this one, actually, all that clever procedural stuff that I mentioned earlier, we didn't do it on this one. This one needed to be controlled by David. This had to have exactly the progression that he had in mind, and that leads to a precision to the way that it's been put together and arranged, and it feels epic. And then Danny comes in, and Danny's performance brings it up as well. This is the kind of the crescendo of the game, and it's a perfect illustration of why the collaboration was so important. The number of different people who put work into this game, and I think it works. I think it works as a result of that. It's something I'm a little mindful in our little chats that we've been having as you play this game, that I maybe haven't mentioned those guys enough. This is a game that could not possibly exist without the collaboration of specifically David and Danny, and what they bring to the storytelling and the environment of this game. So yeah, they're pretty awesome. This level ends with obviously that final rise, and yeah, I've had a few comments. People feel the ending maybe isn't quite as clear as it could be. I will tell you now what I think the ending means. To my mind, these two characters find an escape. They exit the computer. They become fully aware. Well, they are fully aware, but they come out into the real world. What happens next? Well, that depends. I don't know yet. I've got some ideas. I've got some thoughts on what happens next, but essentially every sci-fi movie you ever watch with an AI in happens next. This is their emergence. These are the first precursor AIs to succeed. And that's my reading of the ending. But your reading might differ, and that's absolutely cool. And I like reading some of the theories online. Okay, this is me. I'm done. I've enjoyed our time together. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for buying the game. That was very nice of you. Thank you very much for finishing the game. That was also very nice of you, even with all those stair bits. And thank you very, very much for listening to this, listening to my voice, listening to me in this recording studio, trying to say stuff that's vaguely interesting about the game. I hope that succeeded. Thank you so much for your time. It's really cool of you to join me. If you'd like to hear more of my ramblings, please follow me on Twitter. It's at Mike Bithell. And yeah, I look forward to saying hello to you. Thank you very much for your time. Cheers.